Hello, it's Bob Wells here. Welcome back to another episode of the Undercurrent Stories podcast. Picture this. It's the early 1940s. The world is on fire. Total war has engulfed the planet, and every single resource, every scrap of steel, and every drop of human blood is being mobilised for survival. Now think of Hollywood. Think of the West End in London. The glittering marquee lights, the champagne, the absolute peak of global fame. Men and women who are worshipped by millions, making more money in a week than a regular soldier makes in a lifetime. What do? Do they sit it out in comfort? Do they hide behind studio contracts and promotional tours? No, they drop everything. They walk off the movie sets, strip off of the tuxedos and evening gowns, and put on the uniform. Today we're talking about a time when the line between silver screen heroism and real-world sacrifice completely blurred. We're talking about, for example, Jimmy Stewart flying 20 combat missions over Nazi Germany in a B-24 Liberator. We're talking about British comedy legend Norman Wisdom running top-secret communications for Winston Churchill. And Audrey Hepburn, long before she was a global icon, a young girl risking her life for the Dutch resistance. To take us through these incredible stories of Hollywood and British film stars who traded glamour for the mud, the blood, and the flak of World War II, I am joined by a fascinating guest. He's a British Army veteran, a legendary former Olympian, and the author of British and USA film stars who served their countries in World War II. The brilliant, legendary Bill Tancred. Hello and welcome to the Undercurrent Stories, Bill.
Good morning, Bob. You're very kind. It's great to be back onto your program. Thoroughly enjoyed this, and I hope the viewers and the listeners will do likewise.
Well, it's great that you've come on again, and I made a mistake actually. I should have said welcome back to the podcast.
Well, yes, thank you very much indeed. Yes, I'm delighted to be back, Bob. Thank you.
It's good to have you back. Now, I know that we spoke about this in some length at the previous interview, and I'll refer listeners to our previous interview in the show notes. But could you just give us a brief introduction about yourself and you know, the extraordinary life you've had and how the book came to be, please?
Well, yes, I started off as a young man interested in sport, probably too much sport, neglecting a lot of my educational studies. Failed my 11 plus, which was the horror to my father or my parents. But they're the ones who pushed me to study and take up sport in a very big way. And so when I was young, I just missed national service. But my father said, you need some discipline. So I joined the army as an 18-year-old, and I found the army easier than living at home because he was a disciplinarian. From there, I got very interested into athletics, and I had a wonderful posting at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, which had facilities for the first time, which enabled me to use weights and throw. And over a period of time, I represented England. And then I had 3 successful Commonwealth Games, winning silver in 1974, all those years ago, a bronze in 1970. But the pinnacle really was making the Olympic team, because that's every athlete's dream. And I was very fortunate to represent my country at the highest level. And I took part in the 1968 Olympics, which was in Mexico City, which had all the altitude problems at the time. And the other one, quite different, was 1972 in Munich, which had the first sort of a terrorist attack in the Olympic Village. I then progressed, I think. I won something like 9 British titles in the discus event and set 19 national records. And the last one stood for 25 years. So I always used to tell my colleagues, I'm going to make it hard for you. So I think I did have a barrier, a thing which they all tried to aim, but it took 25 years before it was broken. And alongside that, because I was amateur, I put in as much effort as I could to get a very good education. And I was when I came out of the military, I went to a very prestigious university, Loughborough University, which is famed for its sporting prowess. And I was I would say the first, but the one who was really keen to put athletics, field event athletics and throwing onto the world map. And so Loughborough was very good. And then I went to West Virginia University in the United States on a native fellowship. And that was the first time I really got to know how the Americans helped their young people with sports scholarships. And when I returned home, I was very keen to put something back into sport and in education, help people and support people and motivate people to say it's actually a great life. And I look back now and think I've had a wonderful life. And three things, Bob, shaped me. One was education, the other one sport, and of course, military. And I was very keen, right from a very young age, of looking at films, if you like. And so I started off, I suppose, like all the listeners who are my age now in the 80s, with the magical black and white films called the ABC. And we used to go every week. It was the highlight of our week. And we used to see people like the Bowery Boys, the Three Stooges, Laurel and Hardy. And then I was fascinated by a gentleman called Tarzan. It was Johnny Misswiller, who himself was a multi-gold medalist. When I look back, 1924 Olympics, 1928, and he always had a lovely co-star called Esther Williams, who was a magic, lovely swimmer, lovely-looking girl. And I thought, well, I'd like to be a film star as well. And later on, as I progressed, I was very lucky that I can tell you a lovely little story. I was watching a film that was made in Felixstowe, and one of my grandsons, he couldn't sleep. So I said, "What's wrong, Thomas?" He said, "I can't sleep, Granddad." So I said, "Come and be a good little boy and sit next to me." And I was watching a black and white film at the time. He paused, he sort of looked, and after about 2 minutes, he said, "Can you please put the colour on?" And I said, "There was no colour, Thomas. I'm very sorry." And he paused again and then said, "Life must have been very boring." I said, "Boring?" I said, we were lucky to have a television. I said, "Not like today, you've all got one in each bedroom." So, but look, what films they made, when you look back, I mean, I can just tell you a few of them, which in 1953, Albert R.N., what a wonderful film that was with Anthony Steele. And Anthony Steele was actually a Dunkirk veteran. And it was all about a dummy where they tried to escape. The other film I got involved, and people can remember Starlink 17 with a dashing William Holden of America, which concentrated on one camp. And there was an informant on that one camp who was informing to the Germans what they were going to do. And of course, the magical Colditz story with John Mills, who used to live in Felixstowe, my hometown, at one part of his time. But what a wonderful film. Today, I heard, is part-time hotel. So when you think people trying to escape, people now pay to go in. So the Colditz story. And the other one, of course, Cockleshell Heroes. What a wonderful film showing about these people kayaking and folding kayaks 18 miles downstream, River Gironde, to go to Bordeaux. In December 1942, freezing cold. Can you imagine this? And only 2 of them came back. Then you have that wonderful film, which was the best film ever, The Cruel Sea, with Jack Hawkins played, a book written by Nicholas Montserrat. The Dam Busters. I mean, you could watch Dam Busters every day. I just love the film, the great actors in it. Reach for the Sky, Douglas Bader, The Legless Hero, Strategic Air Command, Jimmy Stewart. So when you watch these films, they inspire. But I always thought, well, were these people playing the part? Did they actually serve? And my word, did they serve? They were the real deal, Bob. So that's how I got into to write about this book. And everyone who's seen it and saw it said, "I didn't realize that, Bill, that Jimmy Stewart, for example, as you said right earlier, Bob, over 20 missions in combat using the B-24s. Marvelous. But what a lovely man he was as well. I mean, he made wonderful films. He did actually write, I think, It's a Wonderful Life. Do you remember that film? And when I look at Jimmy Stewart, they said he used to come back to his old base in Old Buckingham in Norfolk in the 50s when he was a famous movie star. But he had no airs and graces. He still loved the men and the people around him. And that's what I thought was a wonderful makeup of the man himself.
Well, it's an incredible book, and you list a lot of the actors and actresses, and we can't possibly go through every single one of them, but I wanted to talk about a couple of them. But first of all, how did you go about? Obviously, you knew a fair bit about this before you started the book, but sort of why did you want to write the book, and how did you do your research?
Well, I've always been interested in military, Second World War military history, and I think it stemmed up from being very young because where my neck of the woods, they made three films, and one was 1954. It was called The Sea Shall Not Have Them, and the actor there was, or actors were Dirk Bogarde, there was Redgrave, Victor Madden. But I'll tell you a little story. When they were making this film, I was a paper boy on the corner of one of the streets. And this car pulled up and said, can we have a paper, local paper? So I gave me the paper. And I sort of looked and thought, well, they look like famous people. And one happened to be Anthony Steele. And he said, can you deliver 3 or 4 of these papers during the week and we'll give you a tip? Well, the tip was actually more than what I was earning as a paper boy for 3 months. So I took a great affection, and I noticed lots of women were at the hotel, but they wanted to see these movie stars. So that was one film because they made it in the locality. And the other one, I thought Britain was going to be attacked because it was called the Yangtze Incident. It was the story of HMS Amethyst, all about the Chinese Civil War in the latter part of 1949. They had a cat that was named Simon, which actually got what they called the Dickens Medal, the equivalent to the VC, because it was getting after all the rats and whatever. And then The Angry Silence, they made a film in 1960, and it starred the great Richard Attenborough and the wonderful Pier Angeli. And they made the film where my father was working at Reeves & Co., just outside Ipswich railway station. And I was waiting, everyone had to stop because the sports car was coming. They said, the great man's arriving. And I looked, and it was Richard Attenborough with Pier Angeli. And I thought, do you know what? I'd like to be a film star. So they're the ones that triggered. I want to know a little bit more about them. And so as I joined the army, I then mixed with veterans who had either served in the Second World War or went to the Korean War. But they told me about some of the people who went to Sandhurst, like David Niven, Richard Todd. And I suddenly thought I want to know more about these people and how did they develop into becoming famous stars and actually were very, very brave men in their own right. So that's how I really got in. So for the research, of course, like any research, you have to go into the libraries, don't you? I then wrote to people like Audie Murphy's Foundation. I wrote to Jimmy Stewart in America. He's got a wonderful museum. They're all illustrating his film career, but also his military career. And like most people who are very good in the war or very brave in the war, they don't like to talk about their experiences. So it was only later on when he'd sort of passed away that people said, did you realize what this man did? He was the highest ranking officer, film star, in the Second World War, Jimmy Stewart. A one-star brigadier general. Wow, that's some accomplishment, isn't it?
Mm. Most people, I think most people, probably like me, they wouldn't, well, they probably heard that they were in the war, but they wouldn't know to the extent of what they did. Are there any particular individual stories that you sort of either found out at the time or latterly or during research that particularly moved you?
Well, yes. I mean, for example, Christopher Lee, who played all the horror films, did you know he could speak 5 languages fluently? English, Spanish, and German, and whatever. And what a wonderful, wonderful man he was. He was so clever. But I didn't realize how clever the linguist he was. And I'd heard stories he was quite brave as well, because he also worked in the SOE, the Special Operations Executive. He was in the tribunals of trying to get the information out of the Germans because he was fluent in German. So he'd helped to do there. And because he was a quiet man, one story came out, and it said that they wanted to find out from Christopher Lee what he did in the war. And he always kept quiet. And likewise, later on, when he'd had a few drinks, they thought, this is the opportunity. I'll ask Christopher Lee now, what did he do in the war? And he'd had a couple of beers. And so he turned around to these people and said, can you all keep a secret? And they said, yes, of course we can. So he turned around and said, so can I. So he didn't tell them anything.
Oh, fantastic.
So, but there's lots of things like Jimmy Stewart. I'd heard he had a horse called Pie. Okay. And he calls it, he said, he was actually my famous co-star. and everyone liked him. He was a gentleman. But they were all like people like Richard Todd. They all came back after the service and did everything for the benevolent fund for the forces. They did any charity work because they'd never forgotten that 5-year period of serving in the war, what it meant to them and how it altered their lives and how important people were. You know, they were great upstanding gentlemen. David Niven, all the same, never forgot their Sanders training, the part of being a great leader, behaving like an officer and a gentleman. So that's what took me up. I wanted to know more about them.
Do you think, and are there any examples of actors who went out to war and it changed the way in which they acted after the war?
I think, first of all, because they served in the war, it made them better actors because they played the part. And when you watch a film and you really look at them and then you know what the history behind them, you can see how they behave. The whole persona is one of a military side, okay? And I actually think that made them easy. If you looked at Victor Madden, people probably never heard of Victor. He was Sergeant Craig in the Cockleshell Heroes. He played this drill sergeant. Well, my word, he did behave like a drill sergeant. I mean, I'm an ex-regular soldier. So they all had that wonderful, wonderful sort of backup of being there, and then they could sort of transfer that into their acting skills. So I think that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And that's why they were great actors.
I noticed.
Great actors.
Yeah. I mean, and obviously not every actor who went into the war necessarily was out in action. There were other actors doing, should we say, more supportive roles, like the propaganda and training videos and training films and stuff like that.
Yeah, and a lot of them actually learned all of being producers, if you like, because they spent, as prisoner of war, they learned how to put on plays to keep the morale of the troops up. And I just think that's just wonderful, isn't it? So they learned that, and when they finished, they wanted to become producers or actors. So they learned all that. But I had a wonderful actor who I'd like to just share with you. And when you watch the Carry On films, there's an actor called Peter Butterworth, and he played a part of a buffoon. But actually, he did all these films, but his plane was shot down in 1941 during a bombing raid over Holland. And he was imprisoned in Stalag Luft 3 near Zagen, which was part of the Great Escape, where he took part in plays and shows to help to cover the noise of other prisoners digging to escape in the escape tunnels. But what he did, he passed coded messages in instant letters to the British intelligence, M19, as the prisoners were allowed to write letters home. But he was a talented artist. At the same time, he was a master forger. So when you see him, you think he's just a buffoon. But actually, if you go to the Imperial War Museum, you'll just think, wow, what a man this was.
Incredible.
Okay? So he's a skilled forger. Okay, it passed all these secret codes. And he was also one of the vaulters in the Wooden Horse, escaped in 1943. So I would say in real life, he was no buffoon. He was a very, very clever man.
Yeah.
And a brave man at that.
There were a huge amount of films made about the war after the war for obvious reasons. Are there any actors that took part in films that were, shall we say, in the same vicinity or took in similar battles that they were actually in during the war that played that part?
Well, I'm sure Dirk Beauregard played part as well. He went into, say, for example, in Crete, where he had service, I suppose. It was Ill Met by Moonlight. He played the part of, I think it was FEMA, a lieutenant, and they were going to capture a general. So he had that sort of background, if you like, in escaping. He had a lot of them did actually go back into their sort of vicinity where they were taking part in the war. But some of them didn't want to, I suppose, because of the adverse effect, the mental stress, and which they didn't really want to go. But not to take anything away, they were just brilliant actors who could play the part, many parts, in different theatres of war.
Yeah.
So I think that's how I would put it. Yeah. So Jack Hawkins, for example, was in the army, but he was an entertainer. Okay, he learned all his trade of being an entertaining, but he played in so many films, and he has that military bearing, when you see him play all the parts in The Cruel Sea. He played detective roles as well. He's had lots of, But they all learnt it. That's the way they became famous actors, because they actually practiced in real life what they were going to do later on into the acting plays, etc.
Were there any film stars who didn't decide to go into battle?
Well, the ones who probably didn't want to go to battle were not because they didn't want to, I suppose. I suppose because they'd had some sort of trouble medically, perforated eardrums or whatever, as an example. But what they did do, they helped, as you said, in propaganda, making films that actually said how great we were doing, and perhaps not at the greatest time, propaganda films. And that's what I think was very, very good. So they had to all help in the war effort. So I don't think, but some of them, like the American Audrey Murphy, they falsified their date of birth and go in as a young boy into the forces. And so there was lots of that. A bit like the POWs, we had in Britain in the First World War. So these people wanted to go and help, but particularly when Pearl Harbor was attacked, there were so many people, regardless of where they came from, whether they were solicitors, film stars, they all wanted to help and get back at the Germans at the time, or the Japanese.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I was particularly interested and had no idea about the history of what Audrey Hepburn had done with the resistance, helping with the resistance, and her mother.
Yeah, well, she helped the Dutch resistance. A very dangerous job, carrying errands, and like not money as well to help the cause. And I think she was fortunate when she said later on, it was that because she was a young girl, the Germans or the Nazis didn't say young girls would be doing this on the streets. I mean, she was doing very dangerous stuff. And that's why when you think food, they have that food famine. Oh, she was thin, isn't she? All later life, she was a very thin lady. But if you go to the Imperial War Museum, there's a portrait or bibliography of her exploits in the war. Yes, she was a very, very brave young lady at the time. Audrey Hepburn. Marlene Dietrich was another one. Propaganda, entertaining all the troops. She was a staunch against the Nazis. So women did play a role as well in the war effort. Carol Lombard, Clark Gable's third wife. She was the one helping to get war bonds for the United States. And tragically, she was the first casualty who was killed in a plane crash, during the war. So, and that enabled Clark Gable to say, I want to join the forces. And he then joined up and became working at the film unit. There was other people. I think go back on Clark Gable. I think he was trying very, very hard to do the aerial gunner's position. And he had took part in that and saying, because they wanted the recruitment for the most dangerous position. And scores of people wanted to join, result of that. So they all had helped in that war effort.
Do you think there are any examples of actors who sort of were traumatized as a result of serving in the war?
In Dirk Bogarde stories go that he was very troubled because he entered Belgium, and he couldn't quite get over that, particularly in the initial phases. The wonderful Audie Murphy, apparently, he sadly died in a plane crash when he was about 46, he used to sleep with a revolver underneath his pillow. He suffered terribly from post-traumatic stress. Yet, as he said, as a young man, he was the most decorated military combat soldier from America in the Second World War. Yet he had such a baby face, didn't he? He was very small in stature, but he had a heart as a lion, and just an incredible man. But he suffered. And lots of people, like Peter Butterworth, who I just mentioned earlier, every in the evening, he used to walk around the back of his garden in like a square, the garden, and he thought he was still perhaps in the compound in Zagan in Poland. So it must have affected these people. So it has a side effect.
It does. There's a huge cost involved.
I think so. And that's why I got very keen, Bob, to let people, I've got 3 daughters who probably only heard of 1 or 2 of my film stars. And I thought, what a shame, because at my time, when I was growing up, they were famous, and a lot had a sport link. I like, for example, Burt Lancaster. He was an entertainer in the war, but what I liked about it, he became the athletics instructor in the Second World War. But he was a wonderful trapeze artist who took part, if you saw the film in 1950s of trapeze, he actually did the roles himself. So he was a circus performer, but he wanted to come in the effort. I idolized him. I thought I'd like to be like like these people. So they were so inspirational.
Yeah.
But also there was this sort of side effect into the war. But I think a lot of them, Americans, for example, had what they call the GI Bill. So when they finished the war, they could then learn something. A lot of them used the GI Bill to become film stars. The poor Brits had to go back and struggle, if you like, and they didn't have that support from the government at the time to enable them to have a better life after serving their country for so many years.
Yeah. So you've competed at 2 Olympic Games and won Commonwealth medals. Did you find any parallels between elite sport and military service in how these stars handled pressure and adversity?
Yeah, I mean, when I competed against the Americans and I suppose the Russians, because they were very much more funded, if you like, and also supported in terms of their performance. I am unfortunately came in this amateur era when you did it for the love of it. And so scholarships came and whatever, but I noticed a lot of them were military men who perhaps had that training and whatever. And I learned a lot as I was, sadly, towards the latter part of my career, the importance of sports psychology. And I knew 1 or 2 military guys from America, great athletes, discus throwers, who were ex-military men, but they knew all about the performance anxiety, and I suppose it's like, I'll tell you a little thing about David Niven. He was telling his chaps that they had to go over the top. And he said, you only have to do it once, but when I go back to Hollywood, I'll have to do it all again with Errol Flynn.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So you do learn, and you do learn as you get older about the importance of the psychology. And I'm sure that helped all the people in the military at the time. You're not being afraid, trying to be brave, and how do you become brave and whatever, you have to take steps and visualize and whatever. And that's nice to have that training, which can then go into sport and use it in a very pleasant way, not against killing people, but improving your own performance. So there is this little parallel, I think, which is fascinating.
There's lots of stories in the book, and obviously we've really just scratched the surface. As I say, it's an amazing book to read, to hear about some of this stuff. If a listener takes away, should we say, just one story from the book, what would you most want it to be, and why?
I think I'd like them to read Jimmy Stewart, because I think he was the man how you should live one's life. He served his country with distinction when called upon. He also became a great actor, so his profession was 100%. He put everything into to become a performer. And above all, I think he helped people and his subordinates. And I think by guiding him and helping him, supporting those people, that showed what a great leader he was. Something we're lacking in Britain today. I think you need some of that who has got this overall thing of what you expect in life. Good at your job, good for people, and as a good person. So he'd be one person I would say, that's what I like to be. And he said his first film, It's a Wonderful Life.
I think that's a great way to complete this episode. But before I do that, when I was doing the research, Bill, I read, I think it was on one of the Eastern England papers that you'd done an interview with, that you were saying that this would be your final book. I can't believe that. Is that right?
Bob, I think Angela, my wife, would say, no, he's had enough now. I mean, I feel sorry for her, really. I would like to do another book. I'd like to do a novel or whatever, but I think so now. There's so much, there's so many other things. I realise now life is going so quickly, so I'm trying to do as much of other things as I possibly can, and we'll wait and see, I'll say.
Never say never.
Never say never. No. I hope you enjoyed it. You can get this book on Amazon. I think it's 13 quid. Okay. There's not many left now, so...
Grab them quick.
Grab them quick.
Well, Bill, this has been a fantastic conversation. I think your book provides a unique opportunity for us to discover the stories of these brave actors, which, like myself, we might otherwise have never found. And it also serves as a record for future generations. My guest today has been Bill Tancred, former international athlete, sports administrator, academic and author. And you can find a link to Bill's book, British and USA Film Stars, who served their countries in World War II in the show notes. Thank you for coming on the show, Bill.
Thank you very much indeed, Bob. As always, a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much for the interview. Thank you.